Ladies and gentlemen, welcome today to this Geneva Press Club press conference. It's a pleasure to join you online for this special event. We will today have the pleasure to talk about a difficult situation in the world about malnutrition. There is a striking fact that we discussed with our today's speakers, the fact that in 2 years, the progresses in the fight against malnutrition the progresses of 15 years was lost in 2 years, and this is something that really looks gloomy. Now the situation is so that this fight must start on again with even more and more energy, and you have to rethink the system. And to rethink the system, we have with us, the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. This is an organization based in Geneva, and we have the CEO of this organization with us. And I would like to welcome Lawrence Haddad. He's at the head of this organization called GAIN, for Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, since 2016. And Lawrence is also one of the movers and shakers behind the I CAN initiative at COP27 in 2022. He is also the co-convener of the Standing Together for Nutrition in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and the current food crisis. And without waiting any longer, I will give the floor to Lawrence Haddad, and then we also have as speakers two other representatives of this organization. One is the director for India, for the GAIN organization. It's Bhuvna Balasubramanian, and the other one is Michael Ojo from Nigeria, and both of them are in their countries right now and will talk about the specific situation there. But now, to start, I give the floor to Lawrence Haddad, CEO of Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. Lawrence, the floor is yours.
Pierre, thank you, and thank you, members of the press. It's great to be here. Thank you for all the work you do in translating, communicating, broadcasting, and narrowcasting the complex stories that the numbers tell, and you humanize them and make them relatable to everyday people, and that's really important for efforts to reduce malnutrition and hunger. Let me share with you some slides, which I think will help you get a grip on the nature of the issue and what GAIN is doing to respond to it. Bear with me, colleagues. So as Pierre said, the big challenge we have in front of us is not that the numbers are high. That was already the challenge before climate, before COVID, and before the conflicts. The challenge we're facing now is that the numbers are going up for the first time in a very long time, and they're going up very fast. And they're going up so fast that they've essentially wiped out progress from the last 10 or 15 years. I'm going to tell you about that, and I'm going to tell you what we're doing about it. So first of all, here's the problem, the static picture of the problem. And malnutrition has many faces. The face you may be most familiar with is hunger, and there are 768 million hungry people in the world. A face you may be less familiar with is that many more people are deficient in vitamins or minerals, things like zinc and iron, vitamin A, vitamin D. And this is really important for their well-being and their growth. So their bellies may be full, but they're not getting the essential micronutrients they need. In addition, we have about 2 billion people that are overweight plus obese. And within that group, we have about 700 million people who are obese. And as you can see, these conditions overlap. And when you put them all together, we have a situation where 1 in 3 people, in one way or another, worldwide is malnourished. Now, this is getting worse. We are turning back the clock, as Pierre said. At the moment, the 2021 numbers for hunger on the right-hand side, 768 million people, that's approaching the level it was back in 2005 on the left-hand side of the figure. And you can see in the middle, it was going down pretty steadily, reaching a minimum between 2010 and 2015. But since then, it's been steadily going up due to climate change, really biting. And then we had COVID really kicking in and disrupting a whole range of things that are essential for good hunger reduction and malnutrition reduction. And this 768 million number is before we've accounted for the Ukraine invasion. So I expect these numbers to get worse on the hunger side. And on the malnutrition side, on the child malnutrition side, so the numbers previously were for adults, and everyone, adults and children. This is just for children under the age of 5. And these children are very vulnerable, very early on in life, a lot of things happening to their bodies, to their brain development, to their immune system development, and they're very vulnerable. In 2010, we had 54 million of these wasted children. Wasted is the term for children that are very thin, skin and bone. If you looked at them, you'd say, these kids are in trouble. So in 2010, we had 54 million, and we'd made fantastic progress in 2019 to get those numbers down. But the projections are that these numbers are going to go up from 47 million back up to 53, and then up to 60 million. So this is really distressing. This is really turning back the clock. All the progress we've made has been destroyed within a few years. Why does this matter so much? It matters so much because malnutrition in children, it literally steals children's futures. This is a very simple picture of the weight of a brain of a healthy individual at birth, 400 grams, which is the weight of one small water bottle. At 1 year of life, that weight doubles. And as an adult, it's 3 times. So you can see the very rapid growth in brain development and in brain weight between birth and 1 year. And that's because a whole range of billions of neurons are being developed and connected. Cognitive functions are being developed. Visual and visual functions, auditory functions, hearing functions, a whole range of mobility functions are being developed in the brain. And if these are interrupted by malnutrition at a very, very early on stage in life, it means that kids learn less in school, they earn less when they're adults, and they're much more likely to live in poverty. And that's bad for them, for their households, and for the country. What's at the root of all these faces of malnutrition? The words on the petals are different types of malnutrition. You will know someone who has one of these forms of malnutrition. I do, and you will as well. And at the root of all of that is unhealthy diets. What are we doing about it at GAIN? So first of all, who is GAIN? We are an international NGO. We're headquartered in Switzerland. We're 20 years old. We work in all of these different countries. As you can see, we have country directors in all of them. Michael Ojo on the line is the country director from Nigeria. Bhuvana is the country director for India. We are 20 years old, and the countries we work in cover a population of 2.5 billion. What's our mission? It's simple to say, but difficult to do. Our mission is to make healthier diets accessible to all people, especially the most vulnerable. We do this in a number of ways. We work in alliances, right? The word alliance is in our title, the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. But actually, most of our alliances are at the national and subnational level, because that's where the action happens. That's where it has to happen. So we work with governments, absolutely critical, businesses, because businesses are the key players in the food system, civil society, very important for accountability and last mile delivery, and hundreds of local partners. And giving you just a snapshot of some of the things we do. We work with all of these partners to fortify everyday foods with vitamins and minerals. That means adding vitamins and minerals to things like rice, wheat flour, maize flour, and cooking oil. And that reaches billions of people. We run healthy diet campaigns with governments, but they're engaging campaigns. They activate emotions and aspirations, because that's the way we know we get people to think and change behavior. We support small and medium food enterprises. who work in the food system, and we connect them with expertise for their business development and nutrition work, technology, and critically finance. And these small and medium enterprises, they can employ 5 to 50 to 100 people. They're the future of food systems in places like India and Nigeria. The big companies haven't penetrated yet to these food systems, and the small companies, the small enterprises, are where most low-income people get their food. We also work to upgrade informal food markets. Informal food markets are usually food markets that serve millions of people every week, but they are usually very dirty. They have there are animals that are being killed next to fresh food that's being sold. Let's not forget that COVID-19 started in an informal wet market in Wuhan province in China. So we work to upgrade these informal food markets, to put in drainage, to put in good floors, to put in toilets for women, to put in breastfeeding facilities for lactating women. We work to get access to nutritious foods for people, the 1 billion plus people who work in the food system. When they get sick, when they can't come to work, the whole food system grinds to a halt and we all suffer. So their health, they are frontline workers in the fight against malnutrition. It's absolutely essential that we give them good food in canteens. We give them good nutrition messaging. We give them the space to pursue healthy diets. And we work with employers to do this. And then we work also with youth. Youth are very important. Youth are the ones who are going to have to live with the decisions that are made about food systems for the longest time. They're also, their preferences, their attitudes are more malleable, more shapeable. So we need to work with them to shape their preferences. And they have the energy to do things that often their voice is not heard. And we work very hard to make sure their voice is articulated and they have a seat at the table. So these are some of the things we do at GAIN with our partners. Now, by 2027, we've just had a new strategy approved by our board. It was a year-long consultation with all of our partners and with our staff. We will, by 2027, add nutrients to the existing diets of 1.5 billion people. We did, in the past 5 years, we did this for about 1 billion people, and we want to increase this to 1.5 billion over the next 5 years, an additional 1.5 billion. We also want to sustainably transform the diets of 25 million people. It's relatively straightforward to add nutrients to people's diets, adding it to their existing diets. You don't have to change their diets very much. They were already eating rice, now they're eating fortified rice. But to transform the diets of people towards healthy diets in a sustainable way is much more difficult, hence the target of 25 million people. Once we have done our work, we expect that work to continue. And then finally, we need to support food system change. And we're going to do that in 10 countries, the 10 countries where we have offices, such as the Nigeria office and the India office. We are working intensively with government departments, with businesses in those countries, and with civil society and researchers in those countries to transform those food systems. Currently, they're not broken. They're working well. They're just incentivized to work in the wrong direction. They're incentivized to generate food systems. Currently, they're not broken. Obesity. They're working well. They're just incentivized to generate emissions in food. They're incentivized to reduce biodiversity. So we are going to work with governments to change the incentives so we can transform food systems. The features of our new strategy, it's really an evolution of the strategy from the last 5 years. We're really going to double down on healthy diets. We were working on nutritious foods. Now we think it's really important to work on diets as a whole. So that means more campaigns around healthy diets. It means more policy work with governments on healthy diets. And it means not just working on healthy foods and promoting them. It means stopping and reducing the consumption of unhealthy foods that are high in added salts, added sugar, and things like trans fats. It also means protecting the most vulnerable. The most vulnerable tend to be ignored by the food system. They don't have as much purchasing power as most other people in the system. And so therefore businesses and sometimes governments ignore these very vulnerable populations. And we know the most vulnerable are the most affected by the shocks like climate, like COVID, and like conflict. So we're going to work extra hard to reach those populations. We're going to engage nature. Very often the trade-offs between nutrition and nature are described as inevitable trade-offs, and we have to have one at the expense of the other. We are rejecting that assumption. We are now saying we think there are ways in which we, by engaging nature, we can actually advance nutrition more quickly through things like reducing food loss and food waste, and producing more climate resilient, nutritious food crops. And finally, we want to scale. We want to scale. We don't just want to reach a million people in Kenya with a vegetables program. We want to reach 5 million. And how do we get from 1 million to 5 million? 1 million is through our programs. But if we engage with policy, if we engage with partners, if we engage with markets, can we get from 1 million to 5 million? So this, colleagues, is what we're doing. We need $400 million over the next 5 years to do this. We are going to approach, and we already have some of this funding from governments. That's our core funding group. So governments in Europe, North America, multilaterals, some of the key development foundations. We have good relationships with all of those. I think our big challenge for the next 5 years is to reach this 25%. These new funders, we're trying to bring new investors into the nutrition space, high net worth individuals, philanthropies, foundations that may fund other things that are important, but we think they should and could, and with our help will, fund efforts in the nutrition space. And our goal is to get 25% of that 400 million from those new investors in nutrition over the next 5 years. I'm very happy to take any questions you may have, but before we do that, I guess we go to back to Pierre and go to Michael and Bhuvna. Back to you, Pierre.
So thank you very much, Lawrence Haddad, the CEO of GAIN, for this very interesting and plain presentation. I think we understand very well the global situation and what's the goals and the aims of the GAIN organization. And now I would like to give the floor first to Bhuvna. Bhuvna is the head of the director of GAIN in India. She's located in New Delhi right now. And I'd like, Bhuvna, if you can tell us a little bit how this malnutrition question looks like in India specifically. Can you give us a sense of the situation there? Bhuvna, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Pierre. I would like to start with an Asia context and quickly move to India specifically. We have over about 1.8 billion people who can't afford a healthy diet in Asia. And in India, especially, you know, the kind of external factors that Lawrence has talked about, be it COVID or other conflicts or climate change, has significantly affected the access to healthier diets, especially among vulnerable population. And India, although has made significant strides in improving its nutrition indicators, still has a long way to go, be it in stunting or wasting, or we're also looking at an increase of triple burden in terms of obesity and micronutrient deficiencies. So there are multiple things that India has to grapple with, and you know, the trajectories are quite similar across our neighbors or partners, you know, such as Pakistan or Bangladesh, Nepal. Southeast Asia does have a lot of work that we need to do in food systems. Just to touch upon what Lawrence has spoken about in terms of, you know, the consequences of COVID in creating insecurities around and in food, and specifically micronutrient, which is quite, you know, insidious and not very obvious. And in terms of increasing hunger, there has also been a lot of, you know, recurring events across India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, as a result of climate change that we have seen, which results in a lot of disruptions across the food systems, be it reduction or destruction of crop spaces that affects, what's available for consumption, which is further compounded by conflicts. For instance, the Ukraine war had significantly increased the prices of wheat in India. So there are a lot of global interlinkages at play when it comes to, what's at stake in the food systems. For us in our Southeast Asia countries, we work across different partners through alliances for largely looking at how do we make healthier foods available for all. So we work with farmers, for instance, in Bangladesh through the biofortified rice program to ensure access to rice that's biofortified with zinc that's available to consumers. We work with markets and industries to ensure that there is a better access to healthier foods, be it in working with industries in fortifying oil across, which can be scaled up in markets, and also through governments and safety net programs. We work I think India and Bangladesh have a substantial amount of workforce that contributes to different markets globally. So we have a workforce nutrition program that looks at strengthening access to availability of and consumption of nutritious and fortified foods. Similarly, towards the end, we work with governments to ensure scale in reach and also to consumers for ensuring healthier diets and to make healthier diets aspirational for people. I think I'll stop here, just being mindful of time. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Well, thank you very much, Bhuvna, for this insight of the situation in India, where you're located right now. And just to remind you that you can already raise your hand, your electronic hand, to ask questions. We will answer those questions just after Michael Ojo from in Nigeria will present us the situation in his country. So to raise the hand, you can go to the bottom of your screen and you have 3 dots. When you push on that, you click on that, you can raise your hand. It's an easy way to tell us that you have a question, and then you can ask them in a few minutes. But in the meantime, I would like to give the floor to Michael Ojo. And Michael Ojo is the director of GAIN in Nigeria. Michael, can you hear us? The floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Pierre. I can hear you, and my apologies due to a technical problem. My camera has refused to work, but I can assure you I look exactly like the picture that you see in front of you. So for Nigeria, I think just like India, quite a lot of work has been done over many years in the country, but many of the same global drivers and pressures have impacted on availability of food in Nigeria. And perhaps the best way to illustrate this, we've had a recent food consumption and micronutrient intake survey conducted all through last year and just reporting now. And some of the preliminary data that's coming out of that is showing us that now we have 4 out of 5 sampled households, that's 79%, were food insecure, so not having access to sufficient food for their energy needs, with 22% or 1 out of 5 of those severely food insecure, meaning they're going a whole day without food due to lack of access to money and resources. Lawrence talked about wasting earlier. Wasting rates in Nigeria are about 12% of all children under 5 years. And that's a lot worse than it used to be at 7%. Micronutrient deficiencies remain prevalent, especially with vitamin A deficiency and anemia at worrisome levels for the country. Anemia in children is about 62%. And in women of reproductive age, it's 55%. And it gets even worse in pregnant women at about 86%. All of this is coming out of the recent national survey that we've carried out. So that kind of paints a picture of the problem that we're trying to help solve. And how are we working? As Lawrence also already mentioned, diets are the core of all of this physics of malnutrition. And it's through the food system which we work, because that's a key way to address malnutrition, understanding the deficiencies in these food systems and then working with government, with communities, with other partners, with the private sector in alliances and partnerships to transform these food systems so they deliver healthier diets for Nigerians. And again, Lawrence already spoke about the things that we do broadly, and Bhuvna has also given some indication of how some of those things land in India. The work in each country will be contextualized to the issues and opportunities in those countries. For Nigeria, some of the work we're doing include increasing the resilience of our food systems. And so we are working on biofortified crops, maize, cassava, orange flesh, sweet potato. We're also providing support to markets, physical markets and market systems, to increase resilience and ensure that they can continue to operate in the face of the increasing multiple shocks that we see in the system. We're also working on demand generation or increasing demand for nutritious foods, particularly for animal source foods such as eggs, which we produce in large numbers, but a lot of people don't consume. And so we're helping them to understand why this is important. Similarly for fruits and vegetables, increasing demand for those. We also have a fairly large-scale food fortification program, and that's helping us to deliver essential nutrients and minerals via processed staples and condiments, similar to the work that Bhuvna was describing for India. And we also have workforce nutrition, and this is really working, especially with work populations most at risk, particularly those in the farming and smallholder farming sector, helping them to improve their access to nutrition. Finally, we are supporting social protection schemes. So the homegrown school feeding program, other social protection schemes through some of the work that we do, and some of the value chains that we support. So just to give a picture of how this work translates into the country context in Nigeria. Over to you, Pierre.
Very much, Michael, for this point on Nigeria and more generally about Africa. Now, again, just if you want to ask questions, please make it known when using the bottom of the screen button where you can raise your electronic hand. Don't hesitate to ask questions. So, but in the meantime, I would like to come back to Lawrence Haddad, the CEO of GAIN. Lawrence, can you be a little more specific about why had COVID such an impact on the food crisis? And there are the three C's. You are talking about three C's. There is the COVID crisis, climate change, and also the war in Ukraine that had an impact. Can you tell us in which way each of these facts have made that such a strong and negative impact on nutrition in the world? Can you be more specific on that? Thank you.
Sure, Pierre. Thank you for the question. Now, it's great to hear from Bhuvna and Michael. Thank you, colleagues. So there are three kind of routes by which these shocks, and all three of them are big shocks, and I think there'll be many more shocks in the next 10 to 15 years. So there are three routes by which these shocks do their damage, and let's be clear, they do the damage mostly to the poorest people, the poorest businesses, the poorest communities. They do it through three routes. The first route is economically. So very often a shock will result in someone losing their job or losing their livelihood. Whether it's a farmer losing their livelihood because of a flood or a drought, whether it's a small business losing their livelihood because they can't get access to finance, there's a big economic shock. And when people lose their livelihoods, they can't buy the things that are important for malnutrition: good healthcare, good water, good sanitation, and good food. So that's the first route. The second route is through the health system. COVID in particular played havoc with the health system because, of course, the health system was totally focused on dealing with that immediate problem. But because of that, it meant that we couldn't deliver programs that are really important for nutrition through the health system, like vitamin A supplementation for very young children, like treatment of diarrhea for very young children, like breastfeeding promotion for pregnant women and lactating women. So these programs were also scaled back and had a big impact on young child malnutrition. And third, of course, is the disruption to the food system. When food can't get grown properly, because in Ukraine, there is, instead of seeds in the field, there's burning metal in the field, right? When food can't get grown, obviously that's a problem. When food can't get transported from one place to another, that's a problem. When you can't store food because there's no electricity to keep cool chambers and cool houses cool, you're going to lose food. When markets are unsafe or closed down because of COVID, people can't access food. So all of these three factors, these three kinds of shocks, affect these three routes: economy, health systems, and food systems.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Lawrence. Another question that was striking me, we understand very well that the food diet is very important, and the quality of food given to the people is very important. At the same time, we see that the hunger, pure hunger, is a very, very big problem. So isn't there a question here of priority, that instead of putting too much means in food diet, we first would have to try to fight efficiently against hunger, and not only malnutrition, but real hunger problems? Is that opposite, or how do you see this? Can we fight both at the same time?
You can. I mean, when we think about hunger, there's three things driving hunger. One is a lack of food, obviously, lack of food production. But food production is also a means to an end, because food production, if it's done well, is also income generation. So a lack of food is the first factor. A lack of income is the second factor. There may be food in the markets, but people just can't afford it. And then the third factor is a lack of, if you like, peace. We know that war is a very big contributor to hunger. So if we deal with lack of food production, lack of income, and lack of peace, we're well on the way to dealing with malnutrition, but it's not enough. To deal with malnutrition and quality of diet, we also need to think about the diversity of food that's being produced, the diversity of where food is being produced, the diversity of what is being consumed. And also we need to think about the information that's available to people to make informed decisions. So there are three steps, if you like. The most basic is dealing with hunger, making sure people have bellies that are full. The second step is making sure that the food that is being consumed is the right kind of food. And the third step is to make sure that the wrong kind of food, the foods that are rich in salts and added sugar and trans fats that are really unhealthy for you, we must make sure that those are curtailed. So eat more food, eat more of the right food, and eat less of the wrong food. And I think there's a great deal of overlap in the strategies on each of those. There are differences at the margins, but at its core, it's about investing in food systems and making sure they work to reduce hunger, reduce malnutrition, and prevent things like obesity and overweight.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. We have a question from the room. Ebenezer, can you ask your question? Just tell us your name, please, and tell us to whom your question is addressed.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me, everyone?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so I want to appreciate Gain for this opportunity. And also, I want to direct my question to Michael Ujo. Yeah, my name is Ebenezer. Yeah, I'm so particular about the food system in the country, Nigeria. And I feel there's one part of the food system that we are not being addressed, and that's the issue of pricing. Lawrence also mentioned about food production, which I feel is so particular and is so important in terms of eradicating malnutrition in the country. Is there a way GAIN can partner with the government to put legislation on pricing of food system, of the food production? Because I feel I've been in the food production company for some time, and I feel that most of this price or most of the cost of production is at a very high rate, and the poor people, the poor masses cannot afford most of those things. Is there a legislation that can come or a policy that can be put in place to check the pricing of the food in the market? That's my question.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Ebenezer. This question goes to Michael.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ebenezer. So that's a really, really important question for our context. As you know, poverty rates are extremely high in Nigeria. We've just had a recent report from the National Bureau of Statistics saying 133 million Nigerians are living in multidimensional poverty. That's out of 200 million. So that's a big section of the population. And when you kind of translate that into the food systems and into food production and eventually into cost of food and particularly cost of nutritious foods on the market, you know, the impacts are quite severe. Incomes are low, poverty rates are high, but the cost of production is high. So the key factors that drive production, the cost of inputs, getting those harvested crops to the market, keeping sufficient amounts of them fresh and able to be sold in the markets, which depends a lot on the logistics systems and on immediate post-harvest cooling and storage and so on. These are areas where the country is deficient. So a lot of the work that we are doing is working with government to find ways around many of these input costs through the transformation of the food systems. And these are not things that you can fix in short periods. This is going to take quite a bit of investment and time. But the key thing is for us to be able to work with government to show what can be done. And so, for example, some of the work that we did was on the tomato value chain, where we worked with the producers in the north and the markets in the south, working on post-harvest loss reduction, so that because about nearly half of the tomatoes produced in Nigeria end up being lost between harvest and the markets because of all of these difficulties I've talked about. So transport, logistics, cold storage, and cold transport. And working with government, we've found some solutions to that, which means that what gets to the market gets there in sufficient quantities to actually then reflect on the prices, because what tends to happen is if you produce 100 units and 50 units end up being lost in the process, then you try to recover the cost of those lost units by increasing the price at the market. So there's a number of different ways that we need to work, but many of these things rely on infrastructure, which government will have to provide, but also the private sector can support government. And it's really opening those partnerships and alliances and making them possible that we can help to solve some of these problems.
Thank you very much.
Lawrence here. Can I come in on that question?
Yes, sure, Lawrence.
I just wanted to add to that excellent question from Ebenezer and the excellent answer from Michael, that governments have a lot of things they can do to change food systems. I'll give you 3 examples. First, government subsidize lots of different types of food production. but typically they don't subsidize the production of healthier foods. It's typically the staple foods. Now that's important for hunger reduction, but very often subsidizing the healthier foods can actually generate more income as well as more nutritious food. So that's the first thing they can do. Second thing they can do is the governments are big buyers of food, whether it's Nigeria or India. They buy food for their safety net programs, for their social protection programs, for their school systems, for their health systems, for their prison systems. They tend to buy foods that are high in calories and low in nutrients because those tend to be slightly cheaper. What they need to do is to change that and maybe add some pulses, some legumes, some other kinds of foods that will help make that food more nutritious. It may be 5% more expensive, but it'll be 20% more productive when it comes to people's nutrition. And that would send a very strong signal to the private sector that the government cares about food and is willing, nutritious food, and is willing to buy more nutritious food. And the third thing governments do that's very influential is they spend money on agricultural research and development. Every government has an national agricultural research system. And again, most of the productivity and technology and innovation is focused on the big four, rice, wheat, maize, and sorghum. So we want some of that R&D to be focused on vegetables and fruits and nuts and pulses. So governments have a lot of flexibility. Politically, it may be very difficult to do this, but technically and administratively, they have a great deal of degrees of freedom. Back to you.
Thank you, Lawrence, for this answer. And perhaps a question for Bhuvna. I'd like to know, what is, in your view, the most strong resistance for changing the food system? As Lawrence just explained it, we can understand it looks pretty easy, changing this, but in reality, we know it's very hard to make these changes. What is the resistance, and how does, for example, the Indian government react to this pressure to change? Bhuvna.
Thanks, Pierre. I would say more than resistance, I think the biggest resistance is the inherent complexity around the whole mechanism. There is a lot of, acceptance across partners. For instance, in India, fortification of edible oil or fortification of any of the staple foods is not mandatory. But if you look at edible oil fortification market, about 70% of the fortifiable edible oil is already fortified voluntarily. So there is that inherent incentive at the industry level to provide edible oil or foods that have better nutrient value. So even when you look at governments, there is the policies are in there. The government earlier had encouraged scaling up of biofortified rice across the country through the public distribution system, which is a safety net mechanism. So there's a lot of buy-in and investment from private sector and governments and industries. But there are a lot of extraneous or overlapping factors that sometimes delay or set things back. For instance, COVID or climate change crisis that does sort of put a roadblock. But what we need to do probably for India is to look at how do we make our systems more resilient to these extraneous factors. And there are already discussions around it, be our dialogues at COP, and there is that intention for us to move forward in the right direction. And as Michael was saying, it's a complex process, it takes time, but it's important to start thinking through that lens.
Pierre, can I come in on this one as well?
Lawrence?
Just briefly. I think there is resistance within the system. The vested interests, either in government or business, or sometimes even different consumer groups, there are vested interests. People who are doing well out of the food system don't really want it to be transformed. But I also think there's a lack of incentive to change it and a lack of imagination. And I think it may be the lack of imagination, that's really a really big constraint. For example, there's a ton of money, there's a lot of money in the food system, but not enough of it is being directed towards the right kinds of foods and for the right groups and in the right places. I give you 3 examples. There's a massive impact investing industry. Private investors who are progressive and want to see a social return as well as an economic return for their investments. They have nowhere to go at the moment if they're interested in improving nutrition. They can do stuff on climate, on gender, on environment, but they can't do anything on nutrition because there's no nutrition impact investing fund. Until now, GAIN has just launched one called a Nutritious Food Financing Facility. So it's a new mechanism that will allow private investors who care about nutritious food to get a financial return as well as a nutritious return. That's one example. Second example is this thing we're doing called the Private Sector Pledge for Zero Hunger. We actually, for the first time ever, we have a roadmap of what to do to reduce hunger. It's a science-based roadmap. It's a consensus roadmap. Here are 10 types of investments that if you invest in them, you are guaranteed to reduce hunger. Governments are beginning to align to these 10 areas, but private sector is not. So we've developed this private sector incentive mechanism to help big corporations invest more in these 10 areas. They're not investing more in total, they're just reallocating some of their resources away from areas that are not high impact when it comes to hunger reduction to the high impact areas. And the third example of how to get the money in the system towards the things that are good for malnutrition reduction is ESG standards, environmental, social, and governance standards. These are standards that send signals to private investors about which companies are serious or not serious about doing social and environmental and governance goods. But at the moment, there's no health or nutrition component to ESG standards. The only component relating to health in the ESG standards is if a product is going to endanger your life, if it's going to blow up or poison you. So we need to work to improve and get food and health and nutrition into those ESG standards, because that then provides the private investors with a signal, okay, I'm going to invest in this company because this company is taking these things seriously. So there's lots of, I talked earlier about what government can do, but there's lots that the financial sector can do to change the way food systems are financed privately.
Thank you, Lawrence. Just to rebound on what you were saying, what about the food industry itself? I mean, they are probably doing a pretty good business. They are huge companies. They have a way of working, the way of investing in a certain type of foods. What is the incentives for them to change and to produce more quality food, actually?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, we at GAIN, we are one of the few nutrition organizations that think it's absolutely imperative to engage with the private sector. But we don't do this in a naive way. We understand that the food industry is a big part of the problem with malnutrition at the moment, but we also think it has to be a big part of the solution. Second thing we recognize also is that there are some food companies that do not behave well, and there are some that do behave well. And there's a group in the middle where most companies are kind of in the middle. They want to do better, but they don't really know how, or they don't have the incentive to do more. So when we think about what do we do to incentivize private sector to do more, there are a number of different pressure points. So government pressure points are important. Carrots and sticks. Sticks are things like sugar taxes. Those are important, but they're not a silver bullet. They're one of dozens and dozens of things that need to happen. But that's a stick. But there also need to be carrots. In other words, tax breaks for companies that are producing nutritious foods. So governments have a lot of leeway. That's one lever. The other pressure point is from investors, as I said earlier. Investors are increasingly looking for companies that are doing the right thing. So ESG standards, impact investment, these are ways in which we can put pressure on big companies. workforce, the people who work for the big companies, they're increasingly, especially young employees, are increasingly looking to work for companies that have a social purpose, that are trying to do good things as well as generate returns for their shareholders. And the evidence is very clear on this. Companies that invest a lot in corporate social responsibility do better in the financial markets. It's an empirical fact. So again, employees are very important. And of course, finally, consumers. Consumers are absolutely critical. We are trying to build consumer alliances in the countries we work in to put pressure on companies to say, look, there is a latent demand here from consumers. They want to purchase the right thing. Make it easier for them to do so. So we work with those 4 different groups. And in all of those 4 different groups, civil society has our back in terms of putting pressure on the companies to do the right things. When they do the right things, we applaud them for doing it. And when they do the wrong things, we call them out.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lawrence. Perhaps I'd like to turn towards Michael Oyo in Nigeria. Can you tell us what's the awareness of the government of Nigeria and perhaps other African countries, and as well as the private industry, of this necessity to change? And is there a will? Is there first an awareness? And if yes, is there really a will to change? Is there something going on, or are we at the very beginning of this reinvestment in a better food quality? Michael?
Yeah, thank you. So over many years, there's been a lot of investment in trying to improve access to food. Like Lawrence mentioned earlier, much of those investments have actually gone into subsidizing staples and other types of food, which may not necessarily result in improving the nutritional status of people. So there has been a history of investment, not at the levels that governments have previously committed themselves to invest in across most of our countries in Africa. But what has, if you like, changed the levels of awareness or the impetus has been the UN Food Systems Summit in 2020, where virtually all African countries worked over a number of months with different constituencies in their context to really take a look at the food system and what was needed to fix it and to ensure that it actually begins to deliver healthy diets for their populations. And many of them have made commitments and turned these commitments into something called the food systems pathways for each of these countries. And I think that process over the past year has started to embed in each of our countries, with the government systems trying to organize themselves to manage the process with the private sector, with subnational governments, with populations and so on, to begin to detail out what needs to be done. So really working through not just a broad set of objectives and the pathways, but detailing out what the implementation approach is going to be. One of the big issues that we are having to address is the lack of data. And data in terms of understanding really what the key issues and gaps are in the food system. Data in terms of understanding the opportunities to really fix these gaps and issues. But also data in terms of what works or what has worked, including financing or partnerships and different ways of organizing. So there's a lot of work that is going on. I think awareness levels have grown significantly over the last 2 years, especially the role of food systems in tackling malnutrition and ensuring healthy diets are available to everyone. So the will to change is there. The capacity to change, I think, is really where the question is. And that is, some of the work that we are doing to support these governments. We launched something called the Food Systems Dashboard a couple of years ago. And this Food Systems Dashboards help us to understand and diagnose the problems with the food system and also provide solutions to them based on what we know works. This was a global dashboard. Over the past year or so, we've been working with many countries to bring that down and make them a national resource, so more kind of country-based dashboards. And within some of our countries, actually, even making that more useful at sub-national level, so regional or state-level dashboards. And some of this is already helping policymakers, is helping those who want to invest in the food system, and those who want to understand where additional research needs to be done to see where the gaps and opportunities are. And so this kind of tools are critical to improving access to data about the food systems and also helping governments who will really have a will to change to know what to do about the problem.
Thank you very much, Michael, for these explanations. And we will have to wrap up in a few minutes. Perhaps, Lawrence, just a last word from your side. What is, in your view, the first commitment, the most important commitment today to go ahead in the right direction to fight against malnutrition? What should be done today, now, and that really will count?
Well, I can't, thank you, Pierre. I can't really answer the question with one. I think there are two. The first is we need to address the immediate urgent problems. So if we don't address malnutrition in very young children, we've lost the opportunity, because once kids are malnourished and that is not corrected within the first 2 or 3 years of life, that damage that is done is irreversible. The kids carry that with them for the rest of their life. So the first priority is to address the malnutrition of the very young kids that are suffering right now. And that means scaling up a whole range of proven nutrition interventions. The second thing is to plan for the medium and longer run, because we mustn't let the short run imperatives that are very, very important, we mustn't let them undermine the medium and the longer term imperatives. And so for the medium and longer term, we need to design food systems and implement plans that are going to make the food systems generate affordable, nutritious food, lower climate emissions, stronger resilience, better livelihoods, better environmental outcomes. And that can only be done by thinking about all the decisions that actors in the food system make, from what to grow through to what to eat. That is the food system, from farm to plate. That's the food system. And in order to do that, I think Bhuvana said it's a very complex system with lots of different actors. You need to have a plan. One of the brilliant things that the UN Food System Summit of 2021 did, and Gain was leading one of the 5 action tracks, the one on hunger and malnutrition. What the countries did themselves was develop plans that said, this is where our food system is right now. This is where we want it to be by 2030. And here are the things we think we need to do to get from A to B. We are now actively supporting the 10 countries in further developing and refining those plans, and most critically, implementing them. And implementation means political alignment, capacity, as Michael talked about, and finance. We are doing that. We think it's the right thing to do. It's a program called Nourishing Food Pathways. We think that is the way to generate medium-term and longer-term and enduring improvements, sustainable, enduring improvements in nutrition. So we have to deal with the short-term crisis right now, scale up nutrition programs, and we also have to invest in food systems for the medium and long term. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Lawrence Haddad, CEO of GAIN, for this press conference. Thank you for your words. We see that the challenges are huge, but they must be undertaken. They must be won. It's a question of survival too many people. And if you want to have more information about the programs and what GAIN is doing, you can go to www.gainhealth.org. And you can also address yourself to Sadia Kenzig. Sadia Kenzig is at GAIN the person responsible for communication. You have her address in the meeting discussion here on your screen, and don't hesitate to contact her too. And thank you very much also to Bhuvna in India. Thank you also to Michael in Nigeria, and thank you again to you, Lawrence Haddad, for this input, very important input and presentation. I thank you all and wish you a good day, good afternoon, and see you again.